Before we begin this story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Write your city name down below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and let's dive into our story. That cleaning woman has no business interfering with this family's affairs. The words sliced through the air like razor blades in the pristine living room of the Harrison estate. The sound echoed off the Italian marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the manicured gardens of Beverly Hills, creating a reverberation that seemed to amplify the cruelty contained in every syllable. Sarah Williams, 35 years old, stood motionless in the center of that opulent environment, her hands still gloved in blue nitrile, while holding the microfiber cloth she'd been using moments before to carefully dust the custom-made furniture. Her emerald green eyes, deep as wells of quiet determination, locked directly onto those of the woman who had just screamed at her. The charcoal grey uniform she wore, always immaculately pressed without a single wrinkle, contrasted dramatically with the emotional storm now brewing in the atmosphere like a hurricane gathering strength. Victoria Sterling Harrison, 31 years old, stood regally draped in a champagne-colored silk dress from her latest Paris shopping spree, every strand of her platinum blonde hair styled to perfection in an elegant updo, her burgundy nails gleaming under the light of the crystal chandelier like freshly sharpened claws. Her porcelain features seemed carved for magazine covers, but now they were twisted by a rage that transformed her beauty into something almost grotesque. The scent of her French perfume, normally intoxicating, seemed to have been replaced by the acrid smell of pure contempt. Her designer heels created a threatening sound against the hardwood as she approached Sarah like a predator stalking helpless prey. But what tore at the soul most in that scene wasn't the uncontrolled fury of the millionaire's wife or the unshakable calm of the house cleaner. It was the small figure hiding behind Sarah, trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. Tommy Harrison, just 6 years old, clutched his favorite stuffed dinosaur with sweaty little hands, his enormous brown eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. The boy wore a navy blue NASA t-shirt, his absolute favorite, which now seemed like inadequate armor against the cruelty surrounding him. Tommy's delicate frame carried the telltale signs of a child who saw the world differently than others. His autism meant he experienced emotions more intensely, sounds more loudly, and rejection more painfully than typical children. The way he rocked slightly back and forth, the way his free hand flapped nervously at his side, the way he sought comfort in Sarah's presence, all of it spoke to a sensitive soul trying to navigate a world that often felt too harsh and unpredictable. "Mrs. Harrison, please." Sarah's voice was soft, controlled, but it contained a firmness that made the wealthy woman pause momentarily. "Tommy just wanted to show me the puzzle he completed this morning. There's nothing wrong with that." The 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle still lay on the mahogany coffee table, where it had been proudly displayed, moments before Victoria stormed into the room like a tornado of silk and expensive perfume. It was an intricate image of the solar system, completed without a single missing piece, showing an intelligence that most adults would struggle to match. But more than the puzzle itself, what caught the eye was the small note Tommy had written in his careful handwriting, "For Sarah, who makes me feel smart." Victoria followed Sarah's gaze to the completed puzzle, and her face contorted even further. "Smart?" she laughed, but there was no joy in that sound, only poison distilled into audio form. "What a ridiculous notion! You're a house cleaner, a simple domestic worker who can barely afford her own rent. How dare you place yourself on the same level as this family?" The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall and Tommy's labored breathing as he pressed himself closer to Sarah's protective presence. The woman could feel the child's small body shaking against her legs, and something inside her chest cracked like glass under pressure. Mrs. Margaret, the 58-year-old housekeeper who had served this family for over a decade, appeared discreetly in the doorway leading from the kitchen. Her weathered hands, testimony to years of honest work, held a dish towel, but her experienced eyes captured every nuance of the tense scene unfolding. She had witnessed countless arguments in this mansion over the years, but never anything that made her stomach churn with such intensity. "Tommy," Victoria continued, her voice now dangerously low and controlled, "go to your room immediately." "But I want to stay with Sarah." The boy's voice was a terrified whisper. "With Sarah." Victoria exploded again, making even the potted orchid seem to shrink in fear. "She's not your friend. She's not your family. She's just a cleaning woman who's being paid to keep this house spotless, and nothing more." Sarah felt each word like a punch to the gut, but she maintained her dignified posture. There was something in her eyes at that moment, a spark that Victoria couldn't quite interpret, but which sent an inexplicable chill down her spine. It was as if the house cleaner harbored deeply buried secrets that could change everything if revealed at the right moment. "Mrs. Harrison," Sarah spoke, and her voice now carried a tone the mistress had never heard before. "Tommy is a special child who needs genuine affection and unconditional understanding. He lost his mother in tragic circumstances. He experiences the world differently than most children, and all he's looking for is to feel loved and accepted. Don't tell me how to care for my stepson." Victoria walked until she was mere inches from Sarah, her perfumed breath mixing with the nearly palpable rage. "You know nothing about our family, about our life, about the responsibilities that come with being a Harrison." It was then that Tommy did something no one expected. The boy let go of his stuffed dinosaur, which fell to the floor with a soft thud that echoed through the room like a cry for help, and wrapped his thin arms around Sarah's leg with all the strength his small frame could muster. "Don't yell at Sarah." His little voice was tearful, but it contained a courage that surprised even himself. "She's nice to me. She helps me. She understands me." Victoria turned livid. Her nostrils flared like those of a bull about to charge, and for one terrifying moment, it seemed she might raise her hand against the defenseless child. Sarah instinctively stepped forward, placing herself completely between Victoria and Tommy, her arms extending in a protective gesture that was simultaneously maternal and defiant. "Tommy," Sarah crouched down to the child's eye level, "why don't you go with Mrs. Margaret to the kitchen? She promised to teach you how to make those chocolate chip cookies you love so much." The boy hesitated, his eyes moving from Sarah to Victoria, as if sensing that something terrible was about to happen. "Will you be okay, Sarah?" "I'll be perfectly fine, sweetheart. Go with Margaret." Mrs. Margaret quickly approached, extending her calloused hand toward Tommy. "Come on, little astronaut. Let's go make those cookies that are out of this world." Her voice trembled slightly, and she cast a worried glance toward Sarah before leading Tommy to the safety of the kitchen. The sound of Tommy's small feet shuffling away across the marble floor was like a countdown to an inevitable explosion. When it finally faded, Victoria turned to Sarah with an expression that would have frozen anyone's blood. "Now that we're completely alone," Victoria whispered, but each word was loaded with concentrated venom, "I'm going to make something absolutely clear to you. Tommy is not your son. This is not your house, and you are not welcome here. You're destroying the discipline I'm trying to instill in that difficult child." "Discipline," Sarah repeated, and for the first time her voice trembled, not with fear, but with an indignation so deep it threatened to overflow. "Is that what you call discipline? Yelling at a child who just wants affection, making a 6-year-old boy feel rejected and unloved in his own home? How dare you question me?" Victoria took 2 menacing steps towards Sarah, her heels sounding like hammers against the marble. "I am the wife of Dr. David Harrison. I am the lady of this house, and you are just a failed house cleaner who has nowhere else to go." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, and when she reopened them, there was a determination in them that made Victoria involuntarily step back. It was as if, behind the simple facade of the domestic worker, there existed someone much more complex and powerful, than she appeared to be. "You're right," Sarah said, with a calm that contrasted dramatically with the emotional storm around them. "I am just a house cleaner. But you know what? Even being just that, I would never make a child feel rejected and unloved. Even being just that, I know how to recognize when a small soul is suffering. And even being just that, I will protect Tommy from anything that might hurt him more than he's already been hurt." The silence that followed was charged with pure electricity. Victoria was clearly shocked by the employee's audacity, while Sarah remained firm like a rock that had withstood thousands of storms. "You're fired," Victoria said finally, her voice cutting like a freshly sharpened blade. "I want you to pack your things and leave this house immediately, and if I discover that you tried to contact Tommy in any way, I will make your life an absolute hell." Sarah felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. That job represented everything she had, the only way to pay rent on her small apartment in a modest neighborhood, to buy the medications she occasionally still needed. But more devastating than the financial loss was the thought of abandoning Tommy. Leaving him alone meant giving up a child she had learned to love as if he were her own son. "Please." For the first time, Sarah's voice failed. "I need this job. I have nowhere else to go." "You should have thought about that before interfering where you weren't called." Victoria crossed her arms, a cruel smile playing on her painted lips. "Perhaps this will teach you to know your place in the world." It was at that precise moment that the sound of a key turning in the front door lock echoed through the entrance hall. Firm, decisive footsteps approached, and the deep, tired voice of Dr. David Harrison could be heard clearly. "Victoria, I'm home early today. Where's Tommy?" Victoria immediately straightened, her expression changing as if someone had switched one mask for another. The cruel smile was replaced by a sweet, loving expression, and her posture relaxed to appear more feminine and helpless. "Darling!" She practically ran toward the direction of the voice, her heels now making a cheerful sound against the floor. "What a wonderful surprise! Tommy is in the kitchen with Margaret." Dr. David Harrison appeared in the living room, and even exhausted after a long day at the hospital, his presence filled the entire space. Tall, with dark hair showing premature grey at the temples, he wore a navy blue suit that cost more than Sarah earned in 6 months. His eyes, the same warm brown as Tommy's, were kind, but carried the weight of someone who had seen too much suffering and saved countless lives. He kissed Victoria on the cheek distractedly, but his gaze immediately went to Sarah, who still stood in the center of the room. There was something in her posture, a tension he couldn't identify, that activated all his medical instincts like a silent alarm. "Sarah," he said with a tired but genuine smile, "how was the day? Did Tommy behave well?" Victoria quickly interposed before Sarah could respond. "Actually, darling, we were just discussing some changes in our domestic routine." David frowned. There was something in Victoria's tone that didn't sound natural, and Sarah was strangely quiet. Normally, she greeted him with enthusiasm, always had some funny anecdote about Tommy to share, always asked about his day at the hospital with genuine interest and maternal concern. "What kind of changes?" he asked. But before Victoria could answer, a small, excited voice echoed down the corridor. "Daddy! Daddy's home!" Tommy appeared in the living room doorway, moving with the slightly awkward gait characteristic of children on the autism spectrum, his face illuminated by pure, unconditional joy. Mrs. Margaret appeared right behind him with flour-dusted hands and a poorly concealed expression of concern. David crouched down to receive his son's hug, and in that moment, Sarah saw everything she needed to see. The unconditional love in that man's eyes when he looked at Tommy, the way the boy completely transformed in his father's presence, like a flower opening to feel the warmth of the sun. She understood in that revealing instant that David truly had no idea what was happening in his own home. "Dad, Sarah helped me finish the hardest puzzle in the world today." Tommy spoke animatedly, "and she taught me that being different makes me special, not weird." David looked toward Sarah with sincere gratitude. "Really? What a pride. Thank you, Sarah. You always find ways to help Tommy feel more confident about himself. Victoria coughed loudly, calling attention. David, love, as I was saying, I need to talk to you about Sarah. But Tommy hadn't finished sharing his day's emotions. And Dad, you know what else? When some kids at school said I was strange because I think differently, Sarah told me that all the greatest scientists and inventors were different too. She said being unique is like having a superpower. Something in David's face changed subtly. He looked at Sarah with more attention, as if seeing her for the first time in a long while. There was something in her eyes, a depth he had never noticed before, as if behind the house cleaner there existed someone with much more knowledge and experience than she appeared to have. A superpower, he repeated. That's a very creative way to see it. Yes, and she told me that all superheroes have something that makes them unique, and that's what makes them special. Tommy responded proudly. David smiled, but now there was genuine curiosity in his eyes. Explaining concepts of self-esteem and difference to a 6-year-old child with autism in such an effective way wasn't something just anyone could do. It required psychological knowledge, infinite patience, and a deep understanding of how the neurodivergent mind worked. Sarah, he began, but Victoria interrupted him again. David, I really need to talk to you. It's urgent. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Mrs. Margaret held Tommy's hand, clearly wanting to get him away from there, but the boy was oblivious to the adult drama unfolding, happy simply to have his father home. Sarah looked at Tommy, then at David, and finally at Victoria. There was a decision forming in her eyes, a resolution that was maturing like a storm about to break. Dr. Harrison, she said finally, her voice calm but loaded with meaning, we really need to talk. There are situations happening in this house that you need to know about. Victoria turned pale as a ghost. Sarah, don't you dare. Situations about Tommy, Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on David's. Situations about how he's being treated when you're not here. The silence that followed was deafening. David looked from Sarah to Victoria, then at Tommy's face, who was beginning to sense that something very serious was happening. Mrs. Margaret squeezed the boy's hand protectively. What situations? David asked, and his doctor's voice, accustomed to extracting difficult truths, was emerging. Victoria laughed nervously. Darling, don't listen to fantasies from a resentful employee. You know how these people are, always trying to cause problems to get attention. But David wasn't looking at Victoria. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, and for the first time, he really saw her. He saw the pain hidden behind the strength. He saw the determination of someone who had faced unimaginable losses. He saw the genuine love she felt for his son. Sarah, he said softly, tell me everything. And it was at that moment that Sarah made the decision that would forever change the lives of everyone in that mansion. She took a deep breath, looked at Tommy one last time, and prepared to break the silence that had protected the secrets of that house for far too long. But what no one imagined was that the words Sarah was about to pronounce would reveal not only the truth about Victoria, but also secrets about her own past that would leave everyone absolutely speechless. Dr. Harrison, Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly but filled with determination. What I'm about to say may sound absurd coming from a simple house cleaner, but I need you to listen to me until the end. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes shining with poorly disguised panic. David, sweetheart, we're not going to listen to... Victoria, David raised his hand, interrupting her without taking his eyes off Sarah. There was something in the cleaner's posture that activated all his medical instincts, that same intuition that helped him diagnose complex cases. Let her speak. Tommy watched from one adult to another, his large brown eyes capturing the tension floating in the air like a storm cloud. Mrs. Margaret, sensing that the situation was about to explode, discreetly tried to lead the boy away. Tommy, she whispered, how about we go finish those chocolate chip cookies? Let the grown-ups talk. but Tommy shook his head vigorously. "No, Mrs. Margaret, I want to stay with Sarah." His little voice carried a surprising determination for a 6-year-old child. Sarah knelt in front of Tommy, getting to his eye level. Her hands, calloused from work but infinitely gentle, touched the boy's face with a tenderness that made David's heart compress painfully. "Tommy, my love," she said softly, "I need to talk to your daddy about grown-up things. Can you go with Mrs. Margaret? I promise we'll read together later. But you're not going away, are you, Sarah?" The boy's question came out like a terrified whisper, as if he sensed that something terrible was about to happen. Sarah swallowed hard, fighting against the tears that threatened to overflow. I'll always be in your heart, okay?" The evasive answer made Tommy frown. But Mrs. Margaret managed to convince him to go to the kitchen with the promise that he could lick the cookie dough spoon. The sound of his small feet moving away across the marble floor echoed like a farewell. When they were finally alone in the living room, the silence was so dense it seemed solid. David crossed his arms and positioned himself so he could see both Sarah and Victoria, his posture revealing years of experience handling delicate situations at the hospital. "Now," he said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I want to know exactly what's happening here." Sarah breathed deeply, gathering all the courage she had in her chest. "Dr. Harrison, for months I've been witnessing situations that have me very worried about Tommy's well-being." What kind of situations?" David asked, and Victoria could see in her husband's eyes that same intense concentration he showed when evaluating a seriously ill patient. "Tommy is a child who has already suffered a lot," Sarah began, her voice gaining strength. "He lost his mother. He experiences the world differently because of his autism, and he needs extra patience and understanding. But despite all that, he's a sweet, intelligent, loving boy. He just wants to be accepted and loved for who he is." "And he is," David said quickly. "I love my son more than anything in this world." "I know that, Doctor. Anyone who sees you with Tommy can perceive the love you feel for him." "But," Sarah hesitated, glancing quickly at Victoria before continuing, "but when you're not here, things are very different." Victoria laughed with disdain. "How ridiculous. David, this woman is clearly trying to create problems where none exist. She's resentful because I had to make a difficult decision about her employment." "What decision?" David turned to Victoria, a worry line appearing between his eyebrows. "I fired her," Victoria said, raising her chin defiantly. "She was behaving inappropriately with Tommy, creating an unhealthy emotional dependency. As someone with a psychology background, I recognize the signs." David blinked several times, processing the information. "You fired her without talking to me first?" "Victoria, Sarah has worked here for almost 2 years. Tommy adores her. Why would you make such a decision?" "Because," Victoria walked to David and placed her hand on his arm, "I care about our son. This employee was creating an unhealthy relationship with him. Tommy needs to learn independence, self-reliance. He can't keep hiding behind the skirts of a cleaning woman every time things get difficult." Sarah felt as if she had been slapped. The way Victoria pronounced the word employee was loaded with so much contempt that it made her soul ache. But she couldn't give up now. Tommy needed her. "Dr. Harrison," she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion, "can I ask you a question? When was the last time you saw Tommy genuinely happy at home?" The question caught David off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. He thought about recent months, trying to remember moments of genuine joy from his son, and realized with a shock that they always involved Sarah. Tommy laughing while she taught him to identify different bird species in the garden. Tommy excited telling about the stories she invented during snack time. Tommy sleeping peacefully after she hummed softly to him when he had meltdowns. He is happy," David said, but his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. "Doctor?" Sarah stepped forward. Tommy has meltdowns almost every night. He wakes up crying, calling for his mommy. I know because I often stay late, and I hear him crying from his room. That's normal, Victoria interrupted quickly. He's still processing the loss of his mother. It's natural for him to have some emotional episodes. Meltdowns where he begs not to be bad, Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on David's. Meltdowns where he says he doesn't want to be a problem child. Oh, where he promises to be quiet if no one gets angry with him. David felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. No one gets angry with Tommy, he said, but his voice sounded more like a question than a statement. Tommy told me that sometimes he feels overwhelmed by sounds and lights, but he's afraid to say anything because he doesn't want to bother anyone, Sarah continued, each word falling like a bomb. A 6-year-old child, doctor. A child with autism who needs understanding and support shouldn't be afraid to ask for help when he's having sensory overload. That's ridiculous, Victoria exploded. Tommy never told me he was having sensory issues. He was making up stories for attention. Or, Sarah turned to Victoria, her eyes shining with a strength the rich woman had never seen before. He was afraid to tell you because he knew what your reaction would be. The silence that followed was tense, like a violin string about to break. David looked from one woman to the other, trying to process information that seemed impossible to be true. Sarah, he said finally, are you telling me that my son is afraid of his own stepmother? Before Sarah could answer, Victoria let out a sharp, artificial laugh. David, love, you're not going to listen to this defamation, are you? I love Tommy as if he were my own son. Everything I do is thinking about his well-being. Then why, Sarah asked calmly, did you tell him today that he was a difficult and problematic child who was ruining your marriage? Victoria turned livid. You're lying. Why did you tell him he should stop pretending he needs help and learn to handle things alone like other normal kids? Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. He's 6 years old, Mrs. Harrison. 6 years old and neurodivergent. He needs support, not criticism. David felt anger beginning to boil in his chest. His hands clenched into fists, and he stepped toward Victoria. Did you say that to Tommy? I was trying to teach him resilience, Victoria stammered, her perfect wife mask beginning to crack. He needs to learn that he can't use his autism as an excuse not to try. Excuse? David repeated, his voice dangerously low. Do you think my son uses his autism as an excuse? Sarah saw the opportunity and decided it was time to reveal everything. Dr. Harrison, there's something else you need to know. Something about me. David turned to her, still processing the revelation about Victoria, but curious about what else Sarah had to say. I'm not just a house cleaner, she said, and her posture changed subtly, as if she were preparing to reveal her true identity. I mean, I work as a house cleaner now, but before I was a speech therapist. The impact of the revelation was instantaneous. David's eyes widened, Victoria was left speechless, and even Mrs. Margaret, who had discreetly returned to check on the situation, let out a small, muffled cry. Speech therapist? David repeated as if he hadn't heard correctly. Graduated from UCLA, specialized in autism spectrum disorders, Sarah continued, her voice now carrying a professional dignity that had been hidden for so long. I worked for 10 years at Children's Hospital Los Angeles in the developmental pediatrics department. I helped hundreds of children with autism like Tommy develop communication skills and social confidence. David ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the information. But why are you working as a house cleaner? What happened? Sarah lowered her eyes, and for the first time since the conversation began, her emotional armor showed cracks. My husband got sick, brain cancer. I had to leave the hospital to take care of him full time. I spent all our savings on treatments, experimental therapies, specialized care. When he died 3 years ago, I was completely broke. Her words fell into the room's silence like stones in a calm lake. David felt as if he was seeing Sarah for the first time, finally understanding why she had always known exactly how to help Tommy, why her guidance about sensory management and communication strategies were so precise, why the boy felt so comfortable and confident with her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. "Because..." Sarah raised her eyes, and they were shining with unshed tears. "I was afraid you'd fire me. That you'd think I was trying to seem important, or that I wanted to steal some professional's job. I needed this work, doctor. I need the money. But more than that..." She stopped, looking toward the kitchen where Tommy was with Mrs. Margaret. "More than that, I fell in love with Tommy from the first day. He reminded me so much of my little Patience, so brave, so determined, but at the same time, so vulnerable. I couldn't just clean this house and ignore that there was a special child here who needed specialized care." Victoria, who had remained silent during the revelation, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous! You lied to us! You infiltrated our house under false pretenses! David, she could be making all of this up!" But David wasn't listening to Victoria. His medical mind was connecting dots, remembering dozens of small moments where Sarah had demonstrated knowledge that now made sense. The way she observed Tommy's stimming behaviors, the subtle suggestions about sensory breaks, the manner in which she always knew exactly when he was getting overwhelmed or needed a communication break. "The calming techniques you used with him in the garden," David said slowly. "Those weren't just games, were they?" Sarah shook her head. "They were sensory regulation exercises and social communication practice, adapted to seem like play. Tommy needs consistent sensory input to maintain emotional regulation, or there can be behavioral escalation over time. And the picture cards you made for him when he had trouble expressing his feelings?" "Visual communication supports," she responded. "Specific for children with autism who struggle with emotional vocabulary and abstract concept expression." David felt a wave of gratitude and disbelief at the same time. For almost 2 years, a specialized speech therapist had been caring for his son, disguised as a house cleaner, offering high-level professional care without charging anything beyond minimum wage. "Dr. Harrison," Sarah continued, "I know I lied about my background, and I understand if you want to fire me for that. But please, don't let that change what I said about Tommy. He's a special child who needs love, patience, and understanding. He doesn't need to be fixed or normalized for having autism. He needs to be loved exactly as he is." Victoria, sensing she was losing control of the situation, tried one last move. "David, even if this whole story is true, that doesn't change the fact that she created an unhealthy emotional dependency in Tommy. He needs to learn not to rely on other people all the time." "Emotional independence." Sarah turned to Victoria, and her voice was loaded with professional authority that made the rich woman step back. "Doesn't mean abandoning a child to fend for himself. It means building his self-esteem and confidence through positive experiences and consistent support. Tommy isn't emotionally dependent on me. He's developing the ability to trust adults who treat him with respect and understanding." "And what's the difference?" Victoria challenged. "The difference," David interrupted, his voice cold as ice, "is that a child who trusts adults grows up secure and balanced. A child who fears adults grows up insecure and traumatized." He walked to the window, looking at the garden where Tommy had so often played with Sarah, where she had disguised speech therapy as fun, where she had given his son something he didn't even know he was missing, the feeling of being accepted and loved unconditionally. "Victoria," he said without turning around, "I want you to tell me, looking into my eyes, that you never yelled at Tommy, never made him feel inadequate because of his autism, never treated him like he was a burden." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. Her hands trembled slightly, and for a moment, her mask of perfection fell completely, revealing the panic in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt him," she said finally, her voice weak. I don't know how to handle a special needs child. It's difficult, David. It's very difficult. Difficult, David repeated, slowly turning to face her. You think it's difficult to love a 6-year-old boy who lost his mother and struggles every day to navigate a world that often doesn't understand him. It's not that. Victoria tried to explain herself, but the words came out jumbled. It's just that he always needs help, always needs special attention. I don't know how to love unconditionally, Sarah completed softly. That's what you're trying to say. Victoria looked at Sarah with a mixture of rage and desperation. You don't understand. You don't have to live with this every day. You don't have to be perfect all the time. Don't have to maintain appearances. Don't have to love a child, Sarah said, and her words cut through the air like a sharp blade. Is that it? Because I'll tell you something, Mrs. Harrison. I chose to love Tommy. Every day I wake up and choose to love that boy. Not because I have an obligation, not because I'm paid to do it, but because he deserves to be loved. David felt as if he were watching a movie where he finally understood what was really happening. For months, maybe years, he had been blind to his own son's suffering, trusting a woman who saw Tommy as a burden instead of a gift. Tommy, he whispered, more to himself than to the other two women. My God, what have I done? It was at that moment that a small, muffled sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a low sob, almost imperceptible, but which made all three adults freeze. Sarah was the first to react, running toward the sound. When she reached the kitchen door, her heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Tommy was hidden behind the door, his small hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mrs. Margaret was kneeling beside him, whispering words of comfort, but it was obvious the boy had heard at least part of the conversation. Tommy, Sarah knelt in front of him. My love, how long have you been here? The boy raised his little face stained with tears, and what Sarah saw in his eyes made her want to hug him and never let go. It was a mixture of sadness, confusion, and fear that no child should carry. I heard, he whispered. I heard that Victoria doesn't want me. I heard that I'm difficult. I heard that you're going away. David appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, and when he saw his son's state, something inside him broke definitively. He ran to Tommy and lifted him in his arms, pressing him against his chest as if he wanted to protect him from all the evil in the world. Tommy, his voice was choked, Daddy's here. Daddy won't let anyone hurt you ever again. But is it true, Daddy? Tommy asked, his little voice muffled against his father's shoulder. Am I difficult? Am I a problem? David felt tears running down his face, tears he hadn't shed since the day his first wife died. No, my son, you're the most precious thing in my life. You're perfect exactly as you are. Then why doesn't Victoria like me? Tommy's innocent question echoed through the kitchen like a cry of pain. David looked over his son's head and saw Victoria standing in the doorway, her face pale, finally confronted with the consequences of her actions. Because, David said, his voice loaded with a decision that was crystallizing in real time, Victoria doesn't understand what it means to love a family for real. Sarah gently touched David's arm. Dr. Harrison, if you'll allow me a suggestion, maybe we should sit down and talk to Tommy about all this. He needs to understand that none of what happened is his fault. David nodded, carrying Tommy to the living room. Victoria followed them, clearly in shock, while Mrs. Margaret discreetly withdrew, murmuring prayers under her breath. When they sat on the Italian leather sofa, Tommy curled up in his father's lap. Sarah knelt in front of them, her hands gently touching Tommy's. Tommy, she began, I want you to know something very important. You are a wonderful, brave, and special boy. Your autism doesn't make you less important than anyone else, and any adult who makes you feel like you're a problem is wrong. But then why does Victoria? Sometimes, David interrupted, choosing his words carefully, adults don't know how to handle difficult situations. Sometimes they make mistakes. But that's not your fault, Tommy. It was never your fault. Tommy looked from his father to Sarah, then to Victoria, who was sitting in a chair across the room, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. "Sarah," he asked, "are you really going away?" Sarah looked at David, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Tommy," David said, "what would you think if Sarah didn't have to work as a house cleaner anymore? What would you think if she could stay here to help you in a special way, like a speech therapist just for you?" Tommy's eyes lit up like stars. "Really, Daddy? Sarah can stay? If she wants to," David looked at Sarah, "and if she forgives me for being so blind to everything that was happening." Sarah felt the tears finally overflowing. David, David, he corrected her gently. "Just David. I think we've moved past formalities." It was at that moment that Victoria finally spoke up, her voice broken and small. "And me? What happens to me?" David looked at her, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a deep sadness. "Victoria, I think we both know this marriage isn't working. You deserve to be happy, and Tommy deserves to grow up in an environment where he's loved and accepted unconditionally." "Are you asking me for a divorce?" she asked, but she didn't seem surprised. "I'm saying that maybe it would be better for all of us if we recognize that we're not a family," David responded gently. "You never managed to accept Tommy as he is, and he deserves more than that." Tommy, who had been listening to the conversation with the seriousness of a child who matured too quickly, suddenly turned to Sarah. "Sarah," he said, "when you were a speech therapist, did you help kids like me?" "Yes, my love, many kids like you." "And did they get better?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "They became stronger, more confident. They learned they were capable of incredible things." Tommy nodded seriously, as if he were making an important decision. "Then I want you to help me get stronger. Not to stop being autistic," he added quickly, "but to not be scared anymore." Scared of what, my love?" "Scared of being a problem, scared of not being loved, scared of—" His voice failed, and David held him tighter against his chest. "Tommy," Sarah said, her voice firm and full of love, "you never have to be afraid of those things again, because I'm going to be here to remind you every day how special, loved, and important you are. Promise?" "Promise." And in that moment, in the living room of the Harrison mansion, while Victoria discreetly withdrew to process the end of her marriage, a new family was being born. Not a traditional family, but a chosen family, built on love, acceptance, and the determination to protect a special child who deserved all the love in the world. But what none of them imagined was that this was just the beginning of a transformation that would change not only their lives, but also how they all understood the true meaning of family, love, and overcoming challenges. 5 weeks had passed since that life-changing afternoon in the Harrison mansion. Victoria had moved her belongings to a luxury penthouse in Manhattan, taking with her only her designer wardrobe and a bitterness that seemed to have permanently settled in her heart. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, and for the first time in years, the house breathed genuine peace. Sarah had officially left her position as house cleaner and now worked as Tommy's private speech therapist, with a dignified salary and a small office set up in what used to be the guest room. Tommy was flourishing like a plant that had finally found the right soil. His meltdowns had practically disappeared, and his confidence grew each day. David watched these transformations with a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief at seeing his son happy, guilt for taking so long to realize what was happening under his own roof. But there was something else developing within him, something he still didn't dare name, a deep and growing feeling for Sarah that went far beyond gratitude. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed dramatically again. Tommy was at his autism support group meeting, Mrs. Margaret had gone to visit her sister in Queens, and David had come home early from the hospital. He found Sarah in the backyard garden, organizing some new sensory therapy equipment that had arrived that morning. "How was your day?" he asked, watching the graceful way she moved even while doing routine tasks. "Incredible," Sarah smiled. and David noticed how her face lit up when she talked about her work. The new sensory swing arrived, and Tommy is going to be so excited when he sees the weighted blanket. He's been asking when he could try deep pressure therapy. And that's beneficial for him? David moved closer, genuinely interested in the technical answer, but also taking advantage of any opportunity to be near her. Absolutely. Deep pressure input helps regulate his nervous system and reduces anxiety. It's like giving his brain the exact input it needs to feel calm and organized. He's young, motivated. He has everything going for him to make significant progress. David smiled, observing Sarah's professional enthusiasm. You know, I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done for him, right? Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at him directly. David, you don't need to thank me. Tommy is extraordinarily special to me. More special than I ever imagined possible. There was something in the way she said those words that made David's heart race. They were standing in the garden, surrounded by the flowers Sarah had begun tending in her free time, and the golden evening light created an almost magical atmosphere. Sarah, David began, taking a step toward her, I need to tell you something. But before he could continue, the sound of stiletto heels clicking angrily against the marble floor echoed through the house. Both turned to see Victoria entering the garden like a hurricane, her eyes blazing with a rage that seemed to have fermented during the 5 weeks of separation. What a touching scene, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm and venom. The doctor and the former house cleaner playing happy family. Victoria, David sighed, what are you doing here? I thought we agreed you'd call before coming for your remaining things. Ooh, change of plans. Victoria crossed her arms, her black designer dress contrasting dramatically with the colorful garden environment. I discovered some very interesting things about our dear speech therapist here. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Victoria's tone that reminded her of a predator toying with its prey before the final attack. What are you talking about? David asked, though part of him already knew nothing good would come from the answer. Victoria smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Instead, she reached into her Italian leather purse and pulled out a folder of documents. I did a little investigation into our Sarah's past. Very interesting what I discovered. Victoria, this is ridiculous, David began, but she raised her hand, silencing him. Sarah Williams, she read from a paper. Really graduated in speech therapy from UCLA. Really worked at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. But our dear Sarah forgot to mention some crucial details about her departure from there. Sarah turned pale as a ghost. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and she stepped back as if trying to protect herself from what was coming. Victoria, stop this, David said, but his voice sounded less convincing than he would have liked. Professional Disciplinary File Number 4823, 2019, Victoria continued, clearly delighting in the drama she was creating. Sarah Williams was investigated for professional negligence, resulting in permanent injury to a pediatric patient. The silence that followed was deafening. David looked from Victoria to Sarah, seeking a denial, an explanation, anything that would make those words cease to exist. Sarah, he said softly, is this true? Sarah closed her eyes, and when she reopened them, there was a pain so deep it made David's heart shatter. David, I can explain. Oh, this gets even better, Victoria interrupted, turning the page. The patient was a 4-year-old boy, Michael Chen. During a speech therapy session supervised by our Sarah, the child suffered severe emotional trauma that resulted in selective mutism and required years of psychological intervention. Stop, Sarah whispered, her hands covering her face. Please, stop. But Victoria was just getting started. The investigation lasted 2 years. During that time, Sarah was suspended from her duties. She was never formally convicted because the family eventually accepted a financial settlement. But she lost the right to work with children, David completed, his voice sounding strange even to himself. Exactly. Victoria closed the folder with a dramatic flourish. Our dear speech therapist cannot legally work with minors, which means everything she's been doing with Tommy is illegal. David felt as if the world was crashing down around him. He looked at Sarah, who was now crying silently, and tried to process the information he had just received. "Sarah," his voice came out colder than he intended. "Is this true?" Sarah wiped her tears and faced him directly. "The part about the documents, yes, but it's not. It's not like she's telling it. It's not like I'm telling it." Victoria laughed cruelly. "It's all here, black and white. You hurt a child, lost your license, and now you're working illegally with Tommy." "I didn't hurt Michael intentionally," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. It was a misunderstanding. He was a selective mute who had started making progress. During our session, I pushed too hard for verbal communication when he was having an anxiety episode. "And you were supervising," David said, and Sarah could hear the disappointment growing in his voice. "Yes, I was. And I blame myself every day since then." Sarah turned to David, her eyes pleading for understanding. "David, you don't understand. Michael was like Tommy, a special child, sensitive, intelligent. When I caused his regression because of my mistake, I couldn't continue working. I couldn't enter a therapy room without seeing his face, without remembering how he shut down completely when I failed him." "So you lied," David said, and each word sounded like a death sentence. "You lied about being able to work with Tommy. You put my son at risk." "No!" Sarah exclaimed, desperate. "I would never put Tommy at risk. Everything I did with him was based on absolute safety protocols. I would die before letting something happen to him." "How was Michael's family supposed to know that?" Victoria asked with false sympathy. "How was David supposed to know that?" David ran his hands through his hair, clearly conflicted. "Sarah, you understand the position this puts me in. You worked with my son without telling me you'd lost your license. What if something had happened? What if Tommy had been hurt?" "But he wasn't hurt," Sarah screamed, her composure finally breaking. "He's better than ever, stronger, more confident, happier. You said so yourself." "That's not the point," David said, and his medical voice, cold and clinical, was emerging. "The point is that you lied. You omitted crucial information about your professional past. The same way Victoria omitted her contempt for Tommy," Sarah challenged. "The same way you omitted that you knew, deep down, that something was wrong at home, but chose not to see." The accusation hit David like a slap. He stepped back, shocked by the harshness of Sarah's words, but also recognizing the truth in them. "That's different," he said, but his voice sounded weak. "Is it?" Sarah approached him, her eyes shining with desperate passion. "I omitted my past because I was desperate to help Tommy, because I saw in him all the children I couldn't save. You omitted the problems at home because it was easier to believe everything was fine. Which lie hurt Tommy more?" Victoria watched the argument with a satisfied smile. "How dramatic," she commented. "But the fact remains. Sarah cannot legally work with children. And now that David knows this, he obviously can't keep her here." "Victoria, shut up!" David exploded, finally directing his anger at who deserved it. "You came here for what? To destroy Tommy's happiness? To get revenge because our marriage didn't work?" "I came here," Victoria said, straightening up, "to protect Tommy from a woman who clearly cannot be trusted with children." "Protect Tommy?" Sarah laughed, but it was a sound without joy. "You who made this boy cry every night? You who made him feel like a burden? You want to protect him from what? From feeling loved? I want to protect him from being hurt by an incompetent professional who lost her license for negligence." "Enough!" David's voice echoed through the garden with a force that made even the plants seem to shrink. "Enough! Both of you, stop right now!" Both women turned to him, surprised by the explosion. "Victoria," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you're leaving my house now, and I don't want you coming back here unless it's to sign the divorce papers." "David, you can't." "I can and I will," he shouted. You lost the right to have an opinion about anything related to Tommy the moment you made him feel rejected and unloved in his own home." Victoria was left speechless, clearly not expecting to be expelled so brutally. "You're making a terrible mistake, David. This woman is going to hurt Tommy, just like she hurt the other child." "The only person who hurt Tommy here was you," David responded coldly. "Now leave." Victoria looked from David to Sarah, realizing she had completely lost control of the situation. With a dramatic movement, she put the documents back in her purse and walked toward the house. "You're going to regret this, David," she said over her shoulder. "And when Tommy gets hurt, you'll remember my words." The sound of Victoria's heels fading was followed by the violent slamming of the front door. The silence that settled in the garden was charged with tension and unresolved emotions. David and Sarah stood facing each other, separated by physical meters, but by an emotional distance that seemed unbridgeable. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, but neither noticed the beauty of the moment. "David," Sarah began, her voice broken, "I know I made a mistake not telling you about Michael, but you need to believe me when I say I would never do anything that could hurt Tommy." David looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the internal war reflected in his eyes. The doctor in him, trained to trust facts and evidence, fought against the man who had seen with his own eyes his son's transformation under her care. "Tell me about Michael," he said finally. "The whole truth." From the beginning, Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to relive the worst moment of her professional career. Michael was 4 years old and had been selectively mute since age 2 after witnessing domestic violence. He had been in therapy for 8 months when he started working with me. His parents were desperate because no one had been able to get him to speak. She paused, wiping a tear that had escaped. He was incredible, David. So intelligent, so observant, always watching everything but never saying a word. In 3 months of work with me, he had started whispering single words during our sessions. What happened the day of the incident? It was a Friday afternoon. Michael had whispered hello to me at the beginning of the session, which was huge progress. I was so excited about his breakthrough that I pushed too hard. I tried to get him to say more words, to speak louder. Sarah closed her eyes, reliving that terrible moment. But he wasn't ready. The pressure triggered an anxiety episode, and instead of backing off, I kept encouraging him to use his brave voice. He became completely overwhelmed and had a panic attack. And after that, he stopped speaking entirely. Even the whispers stopped. It took 2 years of intensive therapy with other professionals for him to start communicating again. And even then, he never fully recovered his pre-incident progress level. David closed his eyes, imagining the scene. "And the investigation lasted 2 years, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 years where I couldn't work, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about what I could have done differently. Michael's parents sued me, the hospital suspended me, and I entered a deep depression. What happened in the end? Technically, I was acquitted. The investigation concluded it was a case of professional misjudgment, not malicious intent. But the state board decided I had failed to maintain appropriate therapeutic boundaries and revoked my authorization to work with minors. And Michael? He's doing well, Sarah smiled through her tears. After the setback, he worked with other speech therapists who specialized in trauma. He's in regular school now, has friends, speaks when he feels safe. He's learned to manage his anxiety in healthy ways. Did you keep in touch? No, directly, but I follow through social media. I know he's okay, that he's growing up strong and resilient, and that helps me sleep at night. David remained silent for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because, Sarah looked directly into his eyes, I was afraid you'd do exactly what you're doing now. That you'd judge me by my worst moment instead of seeing the good I can do. Sarah, David, I know I made a terrible mistake by omitting this, but in 5 weeks working with Tommy, he's improved more than he had in 2 years of conventional therapy. It's not because I'm special, it's because I love him. It's because every exercise I do with him, every moment I spend by his side, is motivated by genuine love and the desperate desire to see him happy and confident. David approached her, and Sarah could see the internal struggle reflected in his eyes. You understand that legally I can't keep you as Tommy's speech therapist? Sarah nodded, swallowing her tears. I understand. But, he continued, and there was something different in his voice now, I can keep you as part of our family. Sarah's eyes widened. What? Tommy loves you, Sarah, and I... He stopped, took a deep breath, and decided to be brave. And I'm falling in love with you, not with the speech therapist, not with the house cleaner, but with you, with the woman who loves my son unconditionally, who sacrificed her career to care for her own husband, who faces her demons every day to be a better person. Sarah felt as if she couldn't breathe. David, marry me, he said, and the words came out before he could regret them. Marry me. Be the mother Tommy always deserved. Be the woman I want by my side for the rest of my life. It was at that moment that the sound of small feet running across the marble floor echoed through the house. Both turned to see Tommy appearing in the garden doorway, his backpack from the support group still on his shoulders, his face lit up with joy at seeing his father home early. Daddy, Sarah, I learned a new coping strategy today, he announced excitedly, but then he noticed their tear-stained faces and his expression became concerned. Why are you both crying? And why did I see Victoria leaving our house looking angry? David and Sarah looked at each other, then at Tommy, and suddenly laughed through their tears. Because there was the answer to all questions, all doubts, all fears. There was the boy who had brought their lives together, who had shown them both the true meaning of unconditional love. Come here, buddy, Sarah extended her arms to Tommy. We have some news to tell you. And when Tommy ran to throw himself into her arms, dropping his backpack on the ground without fear, David knew he had made the right decision. Because some past mistakes don't define who we are, and some people enter our lives not to be perfect, but to be exactly what we need. But what happened next would exceed all expectations and prove that true love can overcome any obstacle. 10 months after that transformative day in the garden, the Harrison mansion had truly become a home. The walls that once echoed with tension and uncomfortable silences now vibrated with laughter, animated conversations, and the constant music of authentic happiness. Tommy was unrecognizable. The shy, frightened boy had transformed into a confident and radiant child. His sessions with other licensed speech therapists, lovingly supervised by Sarah, now as his mother, not as a therapist, had produced extraordinary results. He could engage in full conversations with peers, express his emotions clearly, and his selective mutism episodes had virtually disappeared. More importantly, he had recovered something that seemed lost forever, the pure joy of being a child. David and Sarah had married in a small, intimate ceremony in the house garden, with Tommy as ring bearer, proudly wearing a special tuxedo with sensory-friendly fabric. Mrs. Margaret had cried so much with happiness that she needed to redo her makeup 5 times. The only notable absence was Victoria, who had moved to Los Angeles after the divorce, taking with her a generous alimony and apparently no regret for the years of suffering she had caused. It was a Saturday morning in spring when the Harrison Williams family, as they now called themselves, received an unexpected visit that would change everything once more. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing pancakes, a weekend tradition that Tommy adored. When the doorbell rang, David went to answer, expecting to find perhaps a delivery person or a neighbor. Instead, he found himself face to face with a woman in her late 30s, accompanied by a boy of about 7 years old who seemed unusually quiet and reserved. "Dr. Harrison," the woman asked, her voice hesitant. "My name is Jennifer Chen. This is my son, Michael. I'd like to speak with Sarah Williams if possible. David felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Michael Chen, the boy from the incident, the child whose trauma had forever changed Sarah's life. He stammered, completely unprepared for that moment. Daddy! Tommy appeared beside David, curious about the visit. Who are they? Michael looked at Tommy with interest, tilting his head slightly. Hi, he said softly. Do you like puzzles too? I love puzzles, Tommy responded enthusiastically. Want to come in? My mom is making the best pancakes in the world. Tommy, David began, but Jennifer interrupted him gently. Please, Dr. Harrison. I know this is strange, us showing up like this, but we need to talk to Sarah. It's important. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, still holding a spatula, and when she saw Michael, the spatula fell from her hand, making a noise that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Michael, she whispered, her hands flying to cover her mouth. The boy looked at Sarah with curiosity, tilting his head thoughtfully. Are you Miss Sarah? Mom told me you were my speech therapist when I was little. Sarah looked from Michael to Jennifer, her eyes filling with tears. Jennifer, I don't understand. What are you doing here? Can we talk? Jennifer asked gently. There are things I need to tell you, things I should have said a long time ago. David, still in shock, invited them in. Tommy, completely oblivious to the adult tension, immediately took Michael to show him his collection of sensory toys, and the two children disappeared into the playroom, chatting animatedly about their favorite coping strategies. In the living room, Jennifer sat facing Sarah, who was visibly trembling. David positioned himself beside his wife, offering silent support. Sarah, Jennifer began, first, I want to apologize to you. Deep, sincere apologies for everything we put you through. Sarah blinked several times, confused. Jennifer, you don't need to. Yes, I do, Jennifer interrupted firmly, because what we did was wrong. Terribly wrong. David frowned. What do you mean? Jennifer took a deep breath, clearly preparing for a difficult confession. The incident with Michael wasn't Sarah's fault. It never was. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt as if she had stopped breathing. What do you mean? David asked. Michael, Jennifer called her son, who appeared immediately, still chatting with Tommy about some video game. Sweetheart, do you remember what we talked about in the car? About Miss Sarah and what happened at the therapy center when you were little? Michael nodded seriously, showing impressive maturity for his age. He walked up to Sarah and, to everyone's surprise, took the woman's hand. Miss Sarah, he said with his clear voice, Mom told me you felt very sad about what happened with me, but it wasn't your fault. Michael, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. I remember what happened, Michael continued. I was having a hard day because Dad had been yelling at home the night before. You were trying to help me feel safe enough to talk, but I was too scared of everything. Jennifer put her hand on her son's shoulder, encouraging him to continue. And when I stopped talking again, Michael said, it wasn't because you did something wrong. It was because I was scared of all the loud voices and angry people, but you were always kind to me. Sarah was sobbing now, years of guilt and pain finally finding a release valve. But why? David began. Because I was desperate, Jennifer explained, her own tears beginning to appear. My son had been traumatized. I was going through a terrible divorce, dealing with domestic violence, financial stress, and my lawyer convinced me that we should sue someone to cover the therapy costs and emotional damages. Jennifer, no. Yes, Sarah. It was that. Pure financial desperation and legal manipulation. We took a tragic but complex situation and turned it into a source of money. And you were our scapegoat. David felt a burning rage growing in his chest. You destroyed her career for money? It wasn't just that, Jennifer continued, clearly determined to confess everything. My lawyer knew someone on the state licensing board. He influenced the decision about Sarah's license. Influenced how? David asked, his voice dangerously low. Bribery. Jennifer said simply. He paid to ensure Sarah would lose the right to work with children, even knowing she wasn't at fault for the incident. Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Jennifer, why are you telling me this now? Because, Michael answered before his mother could, I told Mom it was wrong when I got older and understood what really happened, and I asked her to find you so I could say sorry. And because, Jennifer continued, I divorced that terrible man 3 years ago, and since then Michael hasn't stopped asking about you, how you are, if you're okay. He remembers you with such fondness. You made me feel brave when I was scared, Michael said, still holding Sarah's hand. You invented funny games during our sessions. You always said I was smart even when I couldn't talk. Because you are, Sarah managed to say through her tears. You always were. Tommy, who had been observing the conversation with the seriousness of a child who understands something important is happening, approached Michael. Your mom is crying, he said, concerned. Those are happy tears, Michael explained with the wisdom of someone who had seen much suffering. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they feel relieved. Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a folder of documents. Sarah, I brought something for you. These are signed confessions admitting we lied about the incident, documents proving the bribery, and an official letter withdrawing all accusations against you. Sarah looked at the documents as if they were sacred relics. This means, David said, his voice choked with emotion, you can get your license back. You can officially work with children again. Not only that, Jennifer added, there's also substantial compensation for the lost career years, for the emotional suffering, for everything. Sarah shook her head, still in shock. I don't want money, Jennifer. I never wanted money. I know. Jennifer smiled through her tears. That's exactly why you deserve it. Michael let go of Sarah's hand and walked over to Tommy. Want to see how I use my communication cards when I get overwhelmed? That's so cool, Tommy responded enthusiastically. The two children went back to the garden, their laughter echoing through the house like music. The three adults watched them through the window, seeing Michael proudly showing Tommy how he had learned to manage his anxiety using visual supports. He's okay, Sarah whispered, watching the boy. He's really okay. More than okay, Jennifer confirmed. He's in regular school, has many friends, participates in the debate team. The selective mutism taught him to be an excellent listener, and now he's one of the most empathetic kids in his class. And he remembers me fondly, Sarah murmured, still barely believing it. He talks about you constantly. Says he wants to be a speech therapist when he grows up, to help other kids like you helped him. David put his arm around Sarah, feeling her trembling with emotion. Sarah, do you realize what this means? You can have your career back. You can officially help other children. More than that, Jennifer added, I want you to know that Michael never blamed you for the incident. Not for a second. He always said you were the best speech therapist in the world and that he knew you would do anything to help him. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling years of guilt and pain finally beginning to dissolve. Jennifer, how can I thank you? How can I thank you for giving me my life back? You don't need to thank me, Jennifer replied. You need to forgive yourself and continue being the incredible person you always were. At that moment, Tommy and Michael came running back into the living room, excited about their mutual discoveries. Mom, Tommy exclaimed to Sarah, Michael taught me a new grounding technique, and I taught him about my sensory swing. And Miss Sarah, Michael added, Tommy told me you're married to his dad. That's awesome. Now you get to be a real mom to someone. Michael's innocent words hit Sarah like lightning. She looked at Tommy, who had called her mom naturally without thinking, and felt her heart overflow with love. Michael, she said, kneeling to get to both children's level, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you forgive me for not being able to help you better that day? Michael tilted his head, confused. Forgive you for what? You did help me. You always helped me. You were my friend when I was scared. And in that moment, Sarah finally understood. She had carried guilt that was never hers, had punished herself for a complex situation that was beyond her control, had deprived herself of her calling for something that was more about systemic failures than personal fault. "Jennifer," she said, standing up, "there's something I want to do." "What?" "I want Michael to be my first patient when I get my license back, officially this time. I want to continue the work we started so long ago." "Really?" Michael shouted, jumping with joy. "You're going to be my speech therapist again?" "If you want, my dear." I want. Tommy pulled on Sarah's shirt sleeve. "Mom, does this mean you're going to help other kids like you helped me?" Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, my love. It's going to mean I can help many children, and you can help me, showing them how to be brave and confident." "Can I really?" "Of course. You're going to be my special assistant." David watched the scene with tears in his eyes. His wife, who had hidden her light for so long, was finally shining again, and his son, who had found strength in pain he didn't even know he possessed, was ready to help other children find the same strength. Jennifer and Michael stayed for lunch, and the two families spent the rest of the day in the garden, the children playing while the adults talked about the future. When they finally said goodbye in the late afternoon, there were tears in everyone's eyes, but they were tears of joy and hope. "Miss Sarah," Michael said before getting in the car, "thank you for never giving up on me, even when I wasn't nearby." "Thank you for never giving up on me," Sarah replied, kissing the boy's forehead. That night, after Tommy fell asleep, peacefully without meltdowns, as happened every night since Sarah officially became his mother, David and Sarah sat in the garden, looking at the stars. "Are you going to reopen your practice?" David asked, holding her hand. "I think so, but not a regular practice. I want something special. A place where children like Tommy and Michael can not only recover their communication skills, but also emotionally heal. A place where they can learn that their differences aren't limitations, but unique characteristics that make them special." David smiled. "Are you going to need a pediatric neurologist to support the project? Would you do that?" "Sarah, I'd do anything to see you happy, and I'd do anything to help children like our son discover how incredible they are." Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining with the passion of someone who had rediscovered their purpose in life. "David, do you realize what happened today? I didn't just get my career back, I got my peace back, my ability to forgive myself. And what else? And I discovered that true love, whether for a child, a husband, or a calling, always finds a way to flourish, even in the most difficult circumstances." Tommy appeared in the garden doorway, holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur, his hair messed up from sleep. "Mom, Dad, I had a dream." "A nightmare, my love?" Sarah immediately stood up, but Tommy shook his head. "No, a good dream. I dreamed we had a big center where lots of kids like me could come and feel safe. And in the dream, I was helping them learn that being different is actually pretty amazing." David and Sarah looked at each other, amazed by the boy's maturity and kindness. "And what did you think of the dream?" David asked. "I thought it would be the coolest thing ever. Having a place where every kid could feel understood and loved." Sarah knelt down and hugged Tommy, feeling her heart overflow. "You know what, my love? I think that dream can come true. Really, really. Maybe not exactly like in your dream, but what if our house became a place where many special children could come and feel loved and cared for, like a really, really big family?" Tommy thought for a moment, then smiled the brightest smile his parents had ever seen. "That would be the best family in the whole universe," he said. And in that moment, in the fragrant garden of the house that had transformed from a cold mansion into a warm home, a new family and a new mission was officially being born. 10 months later, the Voices of Hope Communication Center opened its doors in a specially adapted building in downtown Beverly Hills. Sarah had recovered her license with honors. David had become the center's medical director, and Tommy, now communicating fluently and confidently, though still proudly wearing his sensory-friendly clothes, was officially the welcome ambassador for new children. Michael was indeed Sarah's first official patient, and he also became one of the center's youngest volunteers, helping other children adapt to their communication devices and showing that life could be full and happy regardless of communication challenges. Victoria was never seen or mentioned in the Harrison Williams family again. Occasionally, David received calls from lawyers about divorce matters, but she seemed to have moved on with her life in Los Angeles, and they sincerely hoped she had found the happiness she clearly hadn't been able to find with them. Mrs. Margaret continued as the family's housekeeper, but now she was also the official Grandma Margaret to all the children who frequented the center. Her kitchen always smelled like fresh cookies, and her maternal presence was one of the most beloved aspects of Voices of Hope. And every night, when Tommy fell asleep in his bed, peacefully, without meltdowns, surrounded by photos of his extended new family and certificates of recognition for his volunteer work, Sarah and David sat in the garden and gave thanks for having found each other. Because sometimes, the best families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose to build with love, patience, forgiveness, and the unwavering determination to protect and nurture the people we love. And there you have it. What would you do in Sarah's place? Tell us here in the comments what city you're watching from and what you thought of this story. Have you ever been through a situation where you had to choose between protecting yourself or protecting someone you loved? Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share with anyone who needs to hear this message that true love always finds a way to win, and that our ability to love and protect others is what truly defines us as human beings. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve to be loved exactly as we are, and we all have the power to transform someone's life through unconditional love. Tommy learned this, Sarah rediscovered it, and David finally understood that true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in the people we choose to love and protect.